Please close your eyes to hear the enchanted words of Dr. Seuss. At the far end of town, where the grickle grass grows, and the wind smells slow and sour when it blows, and no birds ever sing, excepting old crows, is the street of the lifted Lorax. And deep in the grickle grass, some people say, if you look deep enough, you can still see today where the Lorax once stood, just as long as it could, before somebody lifted the Lorax away. What was the Lorax, and why was it there? And why was it lifted and taken somewhere from the far end of town where the grickle grass grows? The old Onceler still lives here. Ask him. He knows. You can open your eyes now.
Longing for my people out there on their own, rooted so deeply in another land, so far away from home. Been many years, blood, sweat, and tears since that awful day. The train is bound against the wheel, taking all away. Now I fly, African eagle, why don't you fly?
myself, since that seems to be the appropriate thing to do, and you've already waited long enough.
Amen.
I'm Larry Dodge, and
You want me to introduce you?
oh, that's all right. I'm okay so far. We'll just keep going down. Thank you. I call myself the National Field Representative for the Fully Informed Jury Association. I'm also the co-founder of it. And I wanted to say that today is a special day in that it's the 4th birthday of the Fully Informed Jury Association. So, happy birthday. It actually began in Philadelphia 4 years ago today, when a few of us went around the hotel where the National LP Convention was being held and tacked posters on pillars and posts and walls and wherever we could, announcing that we were going to meet in this room that the convention wasn't otherwise using. 44 people showed up just with that. It wasn't even in the convention package or schedule. And out of that came several coordinators who are still with us, state coordinators. And I went home, feeling, wow, there's really quite a bit of interest here. I was really impressed that so many people showed up, and I learned a lot about my own topic from them. It wasn't that I had a corner on the knowledge on this at all. I had not yet met Jim Lorenz, who is the person who got it into the LP platform in the 1981 convention. And I didn't even know that because I wasn't there for the debate that got it in. It was one of the very few planks ever to be put into the Libertarian Party platform from the floor. It did not go through committee. Amazingly, at the 81 convention, there was slack time left over after the platform committee report was discussed. It's never happened since, But there was a few minutes there, and Jim Lorenz stuck his hand up and said, I think we ought to put something in there about the jury's right to judge both the law and the fact.
Larry, you only found it 4 years ago, right?
This was 1981 when he put the plank in. I didn't discover it for several years later. I was on the platform committee for several consecutive years, and it was kind of in there, but I didn't give it a lot of attention. I didn't know that the Libertarian Party was the only party that had that in its platform. I didn't really know a whole lot about it. And yet, it takes me several exposures to get anything clear, okay? Actually, the first exposure I had to the idea came in 1979, when a mentor of mine, and soon to be a member of our board of directors named Red Beckman, came to the Montana Libertarian Party convention, and he challenged us, and he did a hell of a job of it. He came up to the microphone when he was introduced, and he said, I know you libertarians think you know a lot about the Constitution, but I'm going to tell you something about your own Constitution that you don't know at all. Some stuff about it you never heard of. We said, oh yeah? Tell us. And he proceeded to tell us about the power of the jury. He proceeded to tell us how, when the Bill of Rights and the Constitution were written, the intent and the meaning of the word jury included the concept of the jury being a check and balance on the government by virtue of its power to judge the law itself. Not to have to accept it as given by the judge, but the power to think about it and decide whether it was good, whether it agreed with their conscience, whether applying it to an individual would make justice. And we were stunned. We, in fact, did not know that. And so Red followed through on his promise and taught us something about our Constitution that we didn't know. What I'd like,
79 or 80?
that was 1979. Red is still at it. In fact, when I get to the current events portion of our talk, I'll speak again about Red, because he joined us in an activist protest and demonstration over in Billings recently, and we both had a wonderful time. One of the things that I think I'd like to start this talk with is a notion that is persistently problematic for us libertarians. I've noticed over the years, you can't help noticing over the years, that this party tends to divide on an issue called purism or purity versus practicality? Has anybody failed to notice that? It happens all the time, and sometimes it means people walk out of the convention saying, the hell with you guys, we're this side, you're that side, you know, and it's like a small cell dividing. And it's really bothersome if you're trying to get somewhere to see a small group that if they would just hang together could get something done, but they divide on this, we're the purists, we're the pragmatists type thing. One of the really appealing things about FIJA is that it combines them both. There is no distinction there. There is no basis for a division on those grounds. It is absolutely consistent with the hardest core purists and their thinking regarding the platform. At the same time, it's very practical. Notice that you don't need to win election to fully inform a jury. In fact, you don't have to have a majority of anything to do it. I mean, you don't need a majority of the jury, a majority of the legislature, a majority of the prosecutors, and you don't need it. Majority rule is a bothersome thing to libertarians. It means that the minority gets screwed, right? We like consensus. Juries operate on a consensus basis. That's the nice thing about this. So it's very practical, at the same time it's very pure. It also incorporates a dynamic that I think is too often ignored by libertarians. And that is, we talk about the power of self-interest. We realize that human beings operate on the basis of self-interest, and that they should operate on the basis of self-interest. After all, if you don't take care of number one, you're forcing somebody else to take care of you. And that's injustice. That lays the load on somebody else to take your responsibility from you and take care of you. So we prefer it when people are selfish and take care of number one, and we realize if they do that, and they do it effectively, and they're not constrained, that it's not that big of a job, and then they have energy left over to do things for other people. Generosity is at its best after number one is taken care of. And it makes for a really good society. So we revere and we treasure this incentive to take care of number one. But when we go out and campaign for office, we very often ask people to sacrifice, not to take care of number one, but to think of the group or the society first. It's a kind of a habit that candidates have been, of all parties, have been doing for a long time. But we do it the most. We end up offering people a platform that has many good things in it, but a few things in it to turn anyone off. How is it? There's something in this platform to offend everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, something like that is what we sort of say. And so I have been in front of any number of office of groups as a candidate. And someone will say, boy, that's great. Oh, I agree with this, I agree with that. But my favorite one, and it illustrates this point too vividly, was when I was talking to an audience in Butte, Montana, and there was this guy in the audience who was 65 years old that day. And he was the oldest graduate of Montana Technical College, which is a mining school. He'd never had a 65-year-old graduate before, and he was so proud, and yet he wanted to be a hippie, so he had long gray hair and love beads and sandals and the whole bit, you know, but he was 65. And he came up after my talk and he pumped my hand. He said, that was the greatest speech. I loved everything you say. There's just one thing. He says, you can't get rid of Social Security. And you know, I learned after talk after talk after talk after talk that there's always one thing. And that kills your vote. That's the one thing that kills your vote. You don't get that vote because of that one thing. And what is it? It's always the thing that asks the individual to sacrifice. In other words, it's antithetical to his self-interest. Okay, the opposite, fortunately, the opposite appears to be true with FIJA. Most of the people who have joined us, and we have every walk of life you can imagine involved in this thing now. Most of the people who join us and throw their enthusiasm our way are in it because they're self-interested. They only have one interest. It might be It might be marijuana. They might be pro-life. It might be guns. They want, the Second Amendment means a lot to them, and or maybe they want to homeschool their children without interference, or maybe they want to ride a motorcycle without a helmet. Whatever it is, the one thing that they've been getting beat up by the current system about is the one thing that drives them to us. They say, wow, you mean I could go in and say, I believe it's okay for me to run around in my car without seatbelts because I own my own body and I'm responsible for it, and therefore you can't make me buckle up because I feel like my best interest is served by not wearing one? I mean, I can argue the law itself. They get real excited. They join us. Somebody else says, you mean I could go in and say marijuana has medicinal value, and besides it's my own personal business, I'm not hurting anybody, and if there's no victim then there's no problem, and I can argue that in court? Wow, I'll join you. Then they learn that the other guys are in there too. Then they learn, and pretty soon, we had this marvelous convention a few years ago where we had pro-life and pro-choice people there, dopers, gunners, bikers, homeschoolers, tax protesters, what?
Patriots.
Yeah, to patriot, tax protester types, everybody under the sun, these crotchety old guys with red, white, and blue all over them, sitting next to people who were, a little on the mellow side. It was quite an audience, I'll give you that. And one of our speakers got up, and it was the first time he'd ever addressed one of our conventions, and he says, it's not how many of you are here that I find impressive, it's who's here that I find impressive. Every one of them, with the exception of a few ideologues like ourselves, every one of them was there for one reason, one special personal interest reason. Fiji made sense to him or her. And they were as unlike as they could be. So there's those two things appeal to me about Fiji. It's practical and it's pure, and at the same time it really works with self-interest. It doesn't thwart it, and it doesn't ask you to sacrifice your interest for the greater good. Okay, I will take questions, Steve, in a little while here. But unfortunately we got started late, so I want to move right along. I'd like to share with you some interesting things. You can call them success stories if you'd like. I'm not sure I want to hang that label on them, but they're very interesting and they show the power of what we're doing. One of them comes out of Tennessee. You've maybe heard of the Franklin Sanders case, where 52 charges against Sanders and some of his church members were dropped or found not guilty by a jury. Sanders had, with his congregation, spread Fiji literature all over the place before this trial came along. We don't know how extensive the spread was. We just know that 52 tax charges were dropped by a jury against Sanders and his crew. They were dealing in gold and constitutional money and issues like that. There was all kinds of charges stacked up against them. The jury said not guilty.
And the government spent millions of dollars trying to enforce that prosecution.
Yeah, it was a real blow for the government to lose that one. Recently, that was a year or two ago, recently, I'm sure you've all heard of the Randy Weaver trial. Our Fiji activists in Boise, Idaho blanketed the area with 50,000 pieces of literature. 3 or 4 weeks. Not guilty. The Ellie Nestler trial. Now, here's an interesting one. We were really ambivalent on this. I'll bet we spent 2 hours on the phone arguing the fine points of this with our California activists who wanted to go up there and leaflet, and some of them wanted to stay away. Because it is true it's just flat true, that by shooting the alleged assailant of her child, this is, if you're not familiar with the case, this is the woman who shot in the courtroom the person that she believed had molested her boy. And she killed him. And so, a lot of people around town were running around with signs saying, "Nice shooting, Ellie," this kind of thing, or Ellie, or whatever it was. on the one hand, it's one of those things where conscience should play a role in the jury trial. On the other hand, she deprived the defendant of due process in a big way by killing him. On the other hand, you know, I called up Steve Hertzberg, who's one of our, mentors. He's the guy that produced the PBS television show Inside the Jury Room, and he's a regular speaker at our conventions. He's a liberal Democrat, but he had a lot of empathy for Ellie Nessler, and we called him up, and he said there's still no reason that her jury shouldn't know the truth about its powers, even if what she did was despicable. You know, I mean, that's not the point. The point is every jury should know, including her jury. So with that in mind, a couple of our activists did descend on the little town of was it Angels Camp?
Sonoma, I think.
Yeah, in Sonoma County or whatever it was, and gave out fetal literature right in the courthouse. Gave one to the defense attorney, gave one to the judge, and gave one to the jailer, the janitor. Anybody coming in that building got a copy, you know? In fact, it got to the point where the judge held it up in front of the jury pool and says, any of you seen this? And about 1,500 of them went up. Everybody had a copy of this damn thing. This little gem right here, I'm sure you're mostly familiar with. So he gave the jury a resounding lecture on this, the fact that they didn't have any power, and this was a bunch of bunk. But I noticed that when they found her guilty, they found her guilty of manslaughter, not first-degree murder. Now, nullification, as we know it, can indeed include a reduction of charges by the jury. They can reduce charges down to what they think is appropriate and then find guilty. In fact, the only U.S. Supreme Court case that has dealt with this issue at all was exactly one of those, where the jury wanted to find guilty of manslaughter, had an awful time dealing with the idea of finding guilty of murder. And when the Supreme Court rendered its decision, this is the Sparf and Hansen decision of 1895, it said in the majority opinion, which is a really sleazy opinion, if you ever read it, it's 53 pages long. The dissenting opinion is a masterpiece. It is. It's logical, it's clear, it's beautifully documented, but it's a minority. The majority opinion is redundant and sloppy and illogical, but it was a majority. The majority opinion in that case was that the judge doesn't have to tell, even though it is the right of the jury to reduce charges or to judge the law and its application. And if the jury doesn't already know that, tough. So that's the only case on it, and it was exactly like the Ellie Nessler case. It was the same situation where the jury wanted to reduce charges. In California, it turns out, and this is probably at the behest of the prosecutors, not the defense attorney establishment there, but of the prosecutors, in California, jurors are routinely, by law, told that you may reduce charges and find guilty of a lesser included offense. Lesser included charge is the way they phrase that. That means you can't shift over to a whole new dimension and say, well, he's accused of manslaughter, but we're going to find guilty of burglary. You can't do that, but you can find like guilty of manslaughter if the charge is murder, because it's included within, a homicide charge. Okay. Prosecutors like that part of FIJA because it means they can very often find the defendant guilty of something. If not the preferred charge, then something down the list so that they get a win out of the deal. Okay. So we just want the rest of the story told them. You can also find not guilty if you don't like the law, if you think the law is bad or badly applied. And most recently, I promised you a little anecdote about Red Beckman. He comes back into the story many times in our history. He's spoken at our conventions. He's been very supportive. He's written several books, which are for sale over at our booth, or at least you can order them from there. But there was this case in central Montana where a SWAT team of 30 people descended, and I mean literally, they came down in helicopters, among other things, landed on this isolated ranch. I mean, there's no place in the continental or contiguous 48 as isolated as central Montana. Talking less than 1 person per square mile. It's like West Texas or something. This place is empty. Instead of going to the local sheriff with charges that said these people have been poisoning eagles on their sheep ranch, let me go a little aside here. Practically every one of the alphabet soup agencies that we detest most now has its own SWAT teams. This includes the post office. I mean, it's really getting out of control, you know. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sent its SWAT team to descend on these people. Here's this little old man, he's 74 years old in a wheelchair, breathing oxygen through a mask, and his frail little wife, and here come 30 people with machine guns out of the skies and up the road in jeeps and whatnot, you know, and descended on these people to decide if they in fact had been poisoning eagles and were therefore guilty of violating an Environmental Protection Agency law against it. They found a little poison. They didn't find much in the way of evidence. Really, it was kind of scanty. Some of the people said they'd heard them talking about doing it, and somebody said they found a dead eagle out there, but nobody ever saw anybody doing anything. There wasn't a whole lot of evidence, and it really looked bad to have, you know, the local sheriff ignored while these feds just stormed the joint, one of the biggest raids Montana has ever seen on anything forever, you know. I mean, it's incredible. We thought this was a good case for FEJA. It came to trial in Billings, Montana on the 23rd of August, so it's not very long ago. And I called up Red and I said, "You want to join us in the protest?" Well, he hadn't done this kind of thing for quite a while. Well, maybe I can get some friends and, you know, I'll call a few people up and we'll do this and that and the other. So Don Doig and I sent out, we went through our mailing list and found people in the area and sent them memos and made phone calls, and Red did the same thing. And by the time we got there, we'd collected about 8 or 10 people. Wasn't a big deal. We surrounded the courthouse. We sat there with these things and handed them, again, everybody. Going in for a driver's license, we didn't care what it was. You know, we gave them one of these things. And yours truly managed to give one to a federal marshal, who promptly went up to tell the judge that there was these people out there doing this thing, you know. And of course, we'd done a little homework. We called Channel 2 and Channel 8 and the local radio and the local newspaper and all that stuff. And so by the time the marshal came back out with another marshal, introduced themselves and said, "The judge wants you to cease and desist." By now it was 8:45. We'd been there since 8 o'clock because 8 till 9 is when all the jury, you know, the people show up, you know, the pool. So I said, "Is that a court order?" "Do you want to see the judge?" was the answer. I said, "Sure, can't beat that." But they didn't know as Red was around the bend talking to Channel 2 while I'm up talking to the judge, you know. I get up there, and after a few more motions were made by the defense and the prosecution regarding the case, they confiscated all my literature, which included the jury power information kit, a few copies of the latest issue of the FEJA Activist, the rest of these, and put them in a box and set it in the jury box. I could hardly stand it. The jury had not been selected yet, but just symbolically, it really made me smile. And then the marshals sternly advised me that I wasn't really under arrest quite, but I was strongly urged not to leave the building until I had seen the judge. But I said, "But that's why I came here. I'm sure not going to leave the building until I see the judge, so I guess we agree." And soon enough, you know, the lady I'd seen, the court recorder, she'd been typing on that silent court recording machine while these motions and other things were being made. Without a word, she just came by and she grabbed a handful of stuff out of this jury box and went out someplace with it. I don't know where she took it. And then one of the marshals came up to me and said, well, we need a few copies for the defense and the prosecution. Take it away, have at it, you know. And the judge would have at it, you know. So by now the box is going down faster than we could ever have distributed it. And going to all the right people, you know. So then I got called into conference with the judge in the judge's chambers. And here sit the two marshals, the court recorder, the defense team, the prosecution team, and a couple of other hangers-on, and me. And the judge, you know, admonished me that he did not want to violate my right of freedom of speech. However, by this time it's like 9:15, so all the jurors are in there anyway, so I went along with the program, and he said, if you want to do this thing, you'll just have to take it across the street, because we can't have you doing it on the same block. This building uses up an entire block. We don't want you on the sidewalk, we don't want you on the porch, we don't want you on the first floor, the fifth floor, anywhere in the building. You'll have to take it somewhere else if you want your freedom of speech. By this time, Red had called a news conference across the street. So we got across the street from the courthouse, you know, and the cameras panned, you know, the Billings federal courthouse and, you know, U.S. federal courthouse in Billings. And we're, you know, with cameras, it makes you look like you're practically in the courthouse anyway, so the TV coverage was fabulous. It turns out that one of the channels, the anchor newsman on that channel, is the senator who introduced FIJA legislation in the Montana legislature last year. So he gave us about 7 minutes of the evening news. You know, and the other channel did a fabulous job, and they were not in any way connected with us. But the guy, you know, the anchor was obviously fascinated with the question, read the literature, did some homework, and did a marvelous report. The best thing they did was they did not question the validity of what we were saying. In both of the television shows, the reporters were saying they were out there telling jurors their rights. See, not saying, is it or isn't it a right, but here it is, and they were telling them, and the judge made them stop, you know. 2 days later, acquitted. So we don't know if we are causing these, successful results, but I think there's an influence, I really do. And it's encouraged us enough that we're going to go to all the trials of the Waco defendants. We will be at the Jack Kevorkian case. You know, and I think we're going to have a really major effect. The beauty of this is that a trend can be started. There are certain kinds of laws, like the laws against alcohol, which died at the hands of juries in the 1930s. You couldn't get a jury to convict by the early 30s under Prohibition. They'd had it. They didn't like the law. I mean, they either were hung or acquittal, or worse yet, by the 1932-33, you couldn't even get people to show up for jury duty if it involved an alcohol case. I mean, it was really tough. So the government gave up. It really does work. The political end of FIJA is viable. It does mean that if, in certain kinds of cases, if there's a long series of jury acquittals, the politicians get scared. The legislators wonder if they're going to get reelected if they keep, you know, supporting these laws that nobody else is supporting. So the nicest thing about it is it really shreds the special interest influence on our legislature. It makes it go away. There's very little you can do about that. Even if you were elected to the legislature and you showed any reluctance to go along with the program, you wouldn't get on any good committees. You'd be sitting in a corner with a dunce cap while they went on with business as usual. You'd have to elect almost a majority or at least a balance of power. You know, maybe several libertarians in the legislature that would have to be catered to, you know, before you would have enough power to stop the kind of thing that's been going on for decades in our lawmaking bodies. This is very effective. We point out to all legislatures when we lobby now that what you're really getting here is true public interest information. It is not special interest information, because juries aren't special interest groups. They're just ordinary people. And so if you get a consistent pattern showing up in jury verdicts, it's worth listening to, because that's your votes. You're not talking special interest now. You're talking real people thinking about the laws you've just passed. If they're rejecting them, you should listen. As I said, we have several action fronts and plans. By now, we at FEJA headquarters, we keep a record of how many of these we've printed and sent out. We're over 1 million. Quick.
I was on jury duty last week, and I'm gonna have another question later about this, but when one of the neighbors in my apartment building, who isn't affiliated with the Libertarian Party at all, she knows about it because of me only, and I just take care of her dogs, and that's the only reason I've even spoken to her. She found out I was going to be on jury duty, and she said, wait a minute, I've got something at home for you. And she ran in, and she ran out again, and it was this. That's great, and go on.
You know, one of the funniest things that happens to us on a routine basis is the people that call us up at the headquarters and tell us where they found one of these. You know, the men's room at the Times Square, you know, they just show up everywhere, car windshield in South Dakota, you know.
You also distributed master copies of that so people could make their own photocopies. Do you count that in your distribution?
No, as a matter of fact, we don't know how far that's gone. We estimate several million by now because we constantly get order blanks sent to us that are obviously Xeroxes of Xeroxes of Xeroxes. In some cases, they're Xeroxes of faxes of Xeroxes. You know? I mean, so the thing has a grassroots network going that we can't control. We don't want to control.
That's unlibertarian.
Wonderful.
Larry,
Yes.
does this relate at all to civil tort jurors? You know, which makes up half to 3/4 of jurors, at least in Maricopa County.
That's a good question. I won't put it off. Do you want to just go to Q&A now at this point, or shall I wrap it up? Or what?
Make a couple of announcements.
Yes, there's a couple of things that I'd like to talk about first. If I don't, we'll have to leave before I talk about it. One of the industries that is being most threatened by the passage of special interest law at this point is the health industry, the alternative health industry. Some of the people who are either alternative health practitioners or who are into vitamins and food programs, we hear every day about them being harassed or busted, or people that have shops that handle things like grow lights, that's related but not quite the same. It's becoming increasingly evident that monopolies are the wave of the future as far as the government is concerned. They want medical monopolies and they want school monopolies. We know their tricks. Their favorite thing is to create regulated monopolies because then they control everything. And that really worries me as a libertarian or just as a person, that access to information and products that I want is going to be restricted because somebody got to the government. And so we are very fortunate at this convention to have sort of joined forces with Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, whose latest book is for sale at our booth at a reduced price. It'll be on the market, I think, at $6.95. We have it at $5.95. And they're going to donate the profits or proceeds from the sale of this book to FEJA. So if we could just give them a hand, I think this is marvelous. And we get, I am a consumer of these things. I went into a health food shop in Billings just after the event that I was talking to you about. And I bought some niacin and I bought some vitamin E and this stuff, to replenish my stocks. And I handed them one of these, and I started talking about the persecution that's going on in the health and health food industries, and these people just went wild. I was lucky to get out of there within an hour. Every employee and half the clientele and everybody was huddled in the middle of the store, arguing about these laws that have been passed restricting them from pursuing their own self-interest in the way of health. What can be more dear to you than your life and your health? And these people are sincere people who feel like they are the next big victim. So if you get a chance to come by the booth, Dirk and Sandy will not only supplied us with the books, but they'll sign it. So you can have signed copies, and they've posted a little sign up on our wall there that says, you know, the hours that they'll be available for signatures, although you can probably track them down. If you get a copy and you see them around the convention, just track them down, and they'll sign it on the spot for you. Anyway, thanks again, Dirk and Sandy. Okay, the, what?
Between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock.
2 o'clock to 3 o'clock today is when they'll be there. Yes,
You
Don?
might want to mention the First Amendment aspirin that are there also.
Oh, yes. As you may have heard, yours truly here suffered a heart attack in February. I'm recovering, and I'm recovering well, largely in part because I listened to Dirk and Sandy and Don, who turned me onto their products, and I sent away for them and started taking their stuff, and I feel much better. And they now have a product called First Amendment Aspirin.
Aspirin Plus is a lot more than aspirin.
First Amendment Aspirin Plus, and you'll love this stuff, not only for what it contains and what it can do for your health and body, but for some of the stuff on the label. It says this product is not approved by the FDA. In fact, it is illegal to mix aspirin, which is, it's got a small amount of aspirin in it, you know, along with all the various vitamins and minerals that, you know, are good for your heart. They have other things in there, and it says that this is for people over 50 to prevent the, you know, the recurrence or occurrence of heart attack. And since I just turned 50, I'm eligible. And I'm consuming this. They gave me a complimentary bottle, and I promised to test it out and you know, stay up here in front of microphones and talk at you. In any case, come by the booth. Now, I also want to announce that at our booth, we have a variety of things on display, but it's like a catalog store, because I'm moving back from Montana to Texas at this time to rejoin my wife, Honey, for, you know, the winter. And so my car was too full of other things to pack along all the mugs, bumper stickers, buttons, books, and so forth that we have. The list is now tremendous, the numbers of products that we produce, T-shirts and whatnot. So when you get there, if you just pick one of these up, one side of it is a supply shop, where all the stuff that's on the table and then some is available. And the other side's a membership form, and we'll give you a postage-paid free envelope. Just take this with you. You might want to check off whatever it is you want off the table, put it on this list so you can remember what it is, and send it to us later, and we'll honor
You can
that.
pay for it right then and there.
You can pay for it then and there, and I'll mark paid on it and initial it, and then when you send it in, it'll come to you. Already paid. So I just wanted to let you know that. Is there anything else that I should announce? I want to make another pitch, although I am not sure that I'm going to be able to follow through on this. There is a really neat effort going on in the state of South Dakota right now. As you may recall, when we started out, we tried to make some progress toward requiring that the courts inform the jurors of their rights by initiative. We knew right away from the outset that legislators were not going to cotton up to this. You know, what we're really saying to a legislature when we propose this to a legislature is, pass this law so that the people can review your handiwork. You know, who's going to go for that? A few ideologically inclined zealots in the legislature like this senator that I was just telling you about in Montana. Most of them are horrified at the idea of getting public comment back. After all the money they've taken under the table, they don't want to hear about it. Okay? So the initiative process is designed just for things like that. It's designed to end-run legislatures, recalcitrant, reluctant legislators who don't want to deal with certain issues like term limitations, salary cuts or limits, you know, anything that has to do with limiting their money and power. You're never going to get a legislature to do it. So you have to go around them, and the initiative process is a way to do it. Most states do not have the initiative process, or I should say half of them don't. 25 do, 25 don't. Of the 25 that do, I would say 10 are viable places to do an initiative of any kind. The others have administrative restrictions to the point that they really don't have an initiative process except on paper. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. The worst examples. You're in one of the states right now that is a very bad example, Utah. And it's just for one simple reason. In Utah, all initiative petitions have to be put on 16 by 18-inch pieces of paper.
That's changed.
Has it changed?
Good.
I'm so glad, because it used to be one of my best examples. Where are you going to get a clipboard to fit it? Where are you going to buy paper that size? I mean, you know, this is the kind of crap I'm talking about. But the worst remains in Colorado. In Colorado, they have to have 2 colors of ink. One is the black ink, in which the initiative is explained, in which all the signature slots are bracketed. Within that, they have this light blue photo invisible ink that makes up little boxes where all the letters of your name have to be put in each box. And if you miss one of the boxes or go outside, your name is disqualified. But the worst thing of all is that every one of the initiative petitions has to be consecutively numbered, like ballots or tickets, you know, so that there's no two the same. Everyone has to have like a registered license plate number on it, you know, so they're all unique.
Prior to passing them?
Prior to sending them around. You have to register these things with the state. It costs then something like $10,000 just to do the printing. First, you got to run it through the press, 2 colors of ink on both sides, and then consecutive numbers, which means it then has to go through a platen press after it goes through a regular offset press. So, I mean, by the time you print enough to get the 50,000 signatures necessary, you've spent several $1,000s just to get the paper ready. Florida. You can put an initiative up in Florida. It only takes 750,000 signatures, each of them on a separate piece of paper. You know? Okay, the reason I bring this up is because we have found a wonderful place to do an initiative, and that's South Dakota. 12,000 total signatures, no restrictions at all. South Dakota, it turns out, is the first state in the union ever to put in an initiative process. And they're real proud of that fact, and they like to keep it simple. You can, and you know, like most states have what they call a distribution requirement. You have to get so many signatures from this county and so many from that, or this district, you know, and spread it out, and supposedly to show a grassroots groundswell support from around the state. You know, they have all these things. In South Dakota, the Secretary of State sorts them out. Oh, this one goes in Jones County, and this one goes over in Siskiyou County. You know, they do that for you. You know, and you have like a year to get your signatures instead of just a few months. And they allow you summer months. You know, like in Montana, they allow you a certain number of months, but they're all winter months. You know, so it's really a neat process. So the people from South Dakota are supposed to be here, and they're supposed to put a jar on our table over there that says South Dakota Ballot Issue Fund. They still have printing costs and distribution costs and phone call costs and, you know, coordination costs of all kinds of stuff. It's just one of those, you know, drop a bill in the jar type thing. If they don't show up, it's a moot point. But it is an action front. Yes?
We're here. We didn't know we were supposed to do that, I guess.
Is Bill Wells here? He was supposed to bring the jar.
I think so, no?
You can get another jar, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's make something, okay? Because it's really important. You do, you know, Bill Wells and Gus Hercules are doing this thing.
Gus had to go over to
And speaking of the devil, hi Gus. We were just talking about your initiative effort and wondering if you had a jar ready, because I was telling people to.
Now you're going to answer my question.
Yes, I'm going to.
Wait, one more thing. We need volunteers at conventions, so if any of y'all have spare time, you can just come by and spell who's ever there.
Yeah, I need booth volunteers. We have somebody over there from Utah right now, and I'll be over there a lot, and Dirk and Sandy will be around a lot. But a booth takes, you know, help. And we'll just give you the cash kitty and let you sell books and aspirin and whatever you
All the
want.
money for that First Amendment Aspirin Plus goes to the Life Extension Foundation's First Amendment Litigation Fund. The reason we did that was to take a case to the Supreme Court stating that this is not mere commercial, whatever that's supposed to be,
Right.
mere commercial speech. It tells people how to save their lives on there, and that goes beyond, quote, mere, unquote, commercial speech.
Did everybody hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Our point of view is the First Amendment doesn't say except for commercial speech. It just says period at the end of it.
Okay. Good. Anyway, come by our booth and bring your friends.
And your wallets.
And your wallets.
Incidentally, Clinton and Reno are scared of FIJA. 2 days after the Randy Weaver acquittal, Clinton announced he's going to have 48 new crimes in his crime bill that are capital federal offenses. They are deathly afraid of having people tried by juries of their peers where they know they can say, gee, I would have done that myself, not guilty. Which is what
It's a very
the jurors actually
contagious
said.
idea, and they know it. Yes, we are starting to get stiff opposition. I guess the floor is open for questions, and I want to answer Steve's right away, which is, does this apply in civil tort cases and civil juries? The whole civil system is weaker than the criminal system when it comes to trial by jury. It's just something we have to face. At this point, we can't do a whole lot about it. We have, like in the South Dakota thing here, it speaks of both kinds of juries, both kinds of trials, and we try to cover it. But the fact is that in a civil trial, if the judge doesn't like the verdict, he can overturn it. And that's true everywhere. In a federal civil case, as of December the 1st, 1992, less than 1 year ago, the judge is in a position to decide if your case merits a jury. It's a total wipeout of the Seventh Amendment. And we can't do everything at once. Let me just say this. Our strategy at FIJA is to make jury power so sexy, so compelling, so attractive, so intriguing, so contagious, that people all of a sudden regain hope that they might be able to control their own government. Then we can point out to them, but see what they did to your civil system? Well, look at this loophole over here. And they can then get excited about that. But first we want to do one thing and do it right. And then show that there's other problems, and then get them excited about those. If we try to do it all at once, it'll be too much, too soon. But the civil system is weak. There isn't much we can do to fix it. The judge can issue a verdict notwithstanding, it's called. They can just go right over the jury verdict. It can even reverse it. Some of these forfeiture cases you may have read about recently, the judge didn't like the verdict, so he just threw it out and gave the award to the other guys. So it's got to be dealt with, but we're not doing that right now. Yes, Kate?
I just wanted to comment on that. In civil cases involving awarding damages to plaintiffs, there's sort of a mechanism in place where the jury can fine for a plaintiff and award them the sum of $1, which is, I think, tantamount to, it's very similar to the FIJA jury annulment.
Mm-hmm. Jury nullification.
Nullification.
By awarding a token.
A token amount.
Yeah.
Because then the plaintiff can't appeal.
Mm-hmm.
They've won.
Yeah, they won, but they didn't win much.
Yeah, so.
When is our time officially up? Is it over now at 1:15?
Quarter of two.
A 1:45, because that's what it is. Let me just read you the language of the South Dakota initiative, because Gus just brought it in, and I should share it with you. Again, if you can't read this headline, it says, "Group seeks greater jury powers." It's not quite true. The subheadline says, "Proposal would give jurors the right to also interpret laws." Actually, it would remind them of their right. And reporters love to make this mistake, so be prepared. If you try to do anything legislative or by initiative, you will get this misinterpretation. But it's a wonderful headline, and it's nice and big, and I'm sure it's well written.
Yes.
Let me just read you the FIJA initiative in South Dakota. Whenever government is one of the parties in a trial by jury, the court shall inform the jurors that each of them has the inherent right to vote for the verdict which expresses his own conscience and sense of justice, so long as such verdict in a criminal trial does no more than find the defendant guilty as charged, or in a civil case does no more than find against the defendant to the extent claimed by the plaintiff. It's very careful language here. Exercise of this right may include jury consideration of each party's motives and circumstances, evaluation of the justice and constitutionality of the law itself, the wisdom of applying the law to the case at hand, and the degree and direction of actual harm done. Failure to inform the jury of this right is grounds for mistrial and shall result in reversal on appeal. That's really tough language. And there's a reason for everything in there. Like whenever government is one of the parties in a trial by jury, picks up all criminal cases, because that's by their very nature involve the government versus the individual, and it picks up cases like RICO.
And all the seizure cases, too.
Yeah, seizure and forfeiture cases. where the government sues your house, your car, your boat, that kind of thing. As long as the government is a party, the jury has to be told. Otherwise, this trend that I see of the government using the civil system because it's weaker will only grow larger. You have to deal with that in your legislation. Or rather than go into the criminal courts, they will make it a civil case, and you will end up proving yourself innocent rather than them having to prove you guilty. So this is really good language, and Gus and I and a couple of attorneys worked on this forever. It took about 6 or 7 weeks over the phone and fax machine to get this right. Yes?
How much application does that have on federal cases? I understand they do have to observe some state laws.
We don't have a direct effect on federal cases at this point because we are strictly talking about state law, and you can't use state law to affect a federal case. However, just the spillover effect of it's the same people, that's what we're saying. The same jury pools that they use for federal cases come right out of the same area and the same people, same population as the state cases. And we figure it's just a matter of time before enough states have either passed this law because they legislated it or because it was done by initiative, that we can then go and say, well, gee, looks like all the states are going this direction. Let's go for federal legislation just like it. Or a constitutional amendment. We'd go to the same states and say, well, you've already got it on your state statute books. Why not, put it into the federal law books? And I think, that's another eventuality. We're kind of working our way up to it. Yeah.
What do the other 40 states do that don't have viable initiatives?
There you have to work with either grassroots efforts like distributing literature on your own or legislation. You will find when you approach a legislature that practically every legislature has a few conscientious individuals. We haven't found a single legislature yet where we couldn't find a sponsor for this bill, an enthusiastic sponsor who understood it and wanted to do it. In California, there's a guy named
Rogers?
Well, Taga. Yes, I think his name is Tagasuki or something. He's the former mayor of Oxnard. And he signed our governor proclamation. We send it to mayors too, and city councils and county, whoever. And we give it to the state coordinator, and he or she can take it to whoever can declare a day for their jurisdiction. And he declared a jury rights day for the county in which Oxnard is located, and I'm not sure which county, Ventura County. And then he got into the state legislature and he wants to carry it there. And we have found another couple whose names I can't recall, who also want to work with him.
There's a guy running for Senate who plans to, he works with Wolfram, constitutional lawyer, and a Democrat. He claims that people bring peaches to
You need 3 or 4, if you can get it, a team. You need them on both sides of the aisle. Don't ignore the Democrats to just get the Republicans, because you'll find liberal Democrats can believe in this too. I mean, they're not, liberal Democrats stand for certain things. Like if you point out to them that this could help the environmental movement because people who chain themselves to redwood trees could use it.
There's something for everybody.
There's something here for everybody, is right. Let me tell you, just Gus's remark, let me go just a little farther with that. We thought that universally prosecutors were going to hate FIJA. And pretty universally they do. And the reason is very simple. They want a good win-loss record, and this could spoil it. They care more about their win-loss record than they care about justice, if I can overgeneralize a little, but that's largely true. And the same with judges. They like to look like they're law and order judges and they're cleaning up crime, and they got reputations to maintain for doing something about all this crime, most of which is created by all those laws that the legislature is passing. But in any case...
I talked to one prosecutor, a friend of mine. I asked him about that, and he said, well, it's well known that any fool can convict a guilty man.
Nicely put. But we did get a call from a prosecutor, and I'm going to close on this note, and we can talk in the hall afterward. It was a prosecutor from Colorado, a county in Colorado, and he called up one of our Colorado activists, and he said, well, I know that if a defense attorney tries to tell the jury it's right to veto a law and not use it, he's going to get a contempt charge. He'll at least be threatened with contempt, and that'll silence him for the rest of the trial.
What happens if the defendant brings it up in his testimony?
I'll get to that. Defendants have a better chance than defense attorneys, is the answer to that. You know, you can get away with a lot more when you're stumbling along as a pro se defendant. But this prosecutor said, what if I bring it up?
Ah.
And our guy in Colorado didn't know how to answer it, and frankly, I don't either. And he said, I don't know, and nobody's ever asked us that before. Why do you want to know? He said, well, the county that I work in and work for, well, they're kind of liberal, you know, and there's a lot of people up there that don't appreciate all these laws against drugs and stuff like that. And he says, and every time I enforce one of those laws, my popularity goes down. So I guess there is something there for everybody. Thank you very much. That will close my talk.